Let's try.
Hey everybody, it's Kathy Opperman here, founder of Pillars of Light and Love, and this evening we are sponsoring a workshop called How to Stay Calm and Effectively Communicate with Your Children so They Listen, right?
Yes.
This is Renee Grafstrom, and she is the owner-director of the Children's Schoolhouse of Collegeville. And she is here tonight. We have a live audience that will be asking questions, and if we are doing the live stream, which is approximately 7:30 to 8:15, 8:30, you can post a question in the feed at the bottom, and I will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to have you ask the question, and Renee will answer.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Kathy. I appreciate you, having us here, and thanks to the live audience. This is very cool. Just to give you a tiny bit of background information of where I'm coming from with this workshop, I have a background in psychology, so we're looking at how the child develops, but I also have a degree in education. And on September 7th of this year, I'll be starting my 25th year in the classroom, which does not seem possible. I guess I started teaching when I was 12. And I love what I do. I love working with children, and the way they develop and the way their minds work and the way their brains work is just fascinating. And so what I've learned in the classroom, and being a mom, of course, are some tried and true methods for how to communicate with children, creating a peaceful home. You don't have to yell, you don't have to bribe, you don't have to threaten. And it's easy to get into those habits, honestly, it really is. But if you're looking for different techniques, if you're looking for a different way, hopefully the things that I've outlined tonight will give you some things to try at home. So for the people who are live in the audience, if you want to ask a question at any time, by all means, just raise your hand and I'll stop and answer your question. I don't mind as many questions as you want. So here's our outline for tonight. This will just give you an idea of where we're headed this evening. I thought it was appropriate that we were at the Empowering You Center, because tonight I really want to empower you to have a more peaceful home. So that's goal number one. And equally important, I want you to be able to teach your children how to have that intrinsic quality of behaving, not because you're standing over them, not because you're using a threat or a bribe, but because they know this is how I'm supposed to act. I know what my mom and dad's expectations are, or I know what my teacher's expectations are, and they have that quality, that inner discipline, in order to follow through without the parent or the caregiver or the teacher imposing your will on the child, because that doesn't usually work. Children often rebel against that, trying to impose your will on them. It's much better and it's much more effective in the long run if you develop that inner discipline. Okay, so we're always going to go back to that inner discipline. What's the real message that you're trying to get across to the child? Okay, so this is really important, that inner discipline. And you'll probably hear me come back to this over and over as we go through the workshop. Okay. So my first tip for parents, caregivers, babysitters, teachers, you have to set clear expectations. And before you even set the expectations, make sure that both parents are on the same page. Whoever your primary caretakers are, you have to be on the same page. You have to take some time and develop what's important to you in your home. These are the behaviors we want, and this is how we want to get there, okay? If you have two parents or two caregivers that are doing opposite or conflicting methods, all of this goes out the window. So that would be my first piece of advice before you try to implement any of these techniques, is to really sit down with your spouse or with whoever else is really influential in your child's life. Make sure everybody is on the same page, okay? You'll want to set expectations for the child. You're going to lay out very clearly, very calmly, very concisely, exactly what you expect from the child as far as behavior. So what are some common areas? Going to the supermarket, going out to dinner, sitting at the dinner table, cleaning up the playroom. These are all things, you know, that come up day to day, week to week in their lives. And you have to be very clear with the child exactly what it is that you need from them. So if it's going to the grocery store, before you even get in the car, before you even leave the house, you're going to have a calm, quiet conversation with the children or the child as to what you expect. When we get to the grocery store, this is what's going to happen. We have a list, we're going to stick to the list. You're going to, depending on the age of the child, maybe they're young enough to ride in the cart, maybe they're old enough to be walking beside you, maybe they're even old enough to help find some things in the grocery store. Having the child engage in the activity will be another great way to get that behavior that you're looking for. Okay, so set very clear expectations. But when you set the expectation, keep a few things in mind. You want to be consistent. Okay. You want to take into account the age of the child. You want to take into consideration the development of the child and their abilities. And you want to take into consideration that the goals are realistic. The behavior that you're expecting needs to be realistic. So for consistency, you go back to both parents having the same set of rules or the same expectations, but also day to day, your expectations can't change. Okay? If you expect, playroom cleaned up at a certain time or homework done by a certain time, be consistent with those rules. If you're constantly changing the expectations, the child's not going to learn. Okay? And remember, we're going back to this inner discipline. So they've got to know what exactly it is that you need from them. Okay? The age of the child. This gets tricky if you have several kids in your house with varying ages. What you expect from the 2-year-old is certainly not what you expect from the 5-year-old or the 7-year-old. Okay? And that's okay. If the older child in the home is going to come back to you and say, well, but the younger sibling doesn't have to do X, Y, Z. That's okay. It's fair that there's different expectations for a 3-year-old than a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. And, I would just reinforce that. Well, when you were 3, you didn't have to do that either. But now you're 5, now you're 6. And you're old enough to do these things. The development and the abilities of the children. Certainly if you have a child with special needs, you have to reassess. We have several children in our program at school with different abilities and different levels of ability. And so that's something you do have to take into consideration. When you're setting those expectations, you may have to raise or lower the bar with the expectations. Be realistic. Is it realistic for a 4-year-old to sit through a fancy dinner. No, they're not going to be able to have the self-control to be able to sit through a long, dinner at a restaurant. Can you expect the 4-year-old to be able to sit quietly at home for dinner, sitting at the table, using good manners, using a polite tone of voice, eating their dinner? Absolutely. But you really have to be realistic with those expectations. Are there any questions so far from the live audience about setting the expectations? So your tone and eye contact are extremely important when you're working with children. You want to be nose to nose, eye to eye with them when you're talking to a child. Your tone of voice should be low and consistent. You have to see yourself from the child's perspective. So you standing and talking to a child like this is very intimidating. That's not our goal. Our goal is not to intimidate the child. Our goal is to teach the child and get to that inner discipline, okay? Eye contact is extremely important. You always want to make sure that they're looking and listening before you set those expectations. I would state the consequences very clearly, and this is where that if-then statement comes into play, okay? You'll need to have a logical consequence in place before you use this if-then statement. So what are some issues that you might be having at home, and we can develop an if-then statement?
If you don't pick up the toys, then you have to go to bed early. That's what I say at my house.
Okay, yeah, so if toys aren't picked up, it's an early bedtime. I think that's a very logical consequence. Or if these toys aren't picked up, well, tomorrow they might not be available for you to play with, okay, because you weren't able to follow through with the expectations that we set. Okay, so you've already gone through and had those expectations clearly laid out. At such and such time, we're going to have to clean up. Maybe give a 5-minute warning. In 5 minutes, we're going to be cleaning up these toys. And then follow through with your if-then statement. If the toys aren't cleaned up, then whatever your consequence is. Yes?
What about, Renee, when some people, parents will say, if you don't do this, then this is going to happen. But then they don't do it, like you're saying, the follow through, and then the child gets used to that. So then how do you go back if you've done it for a long time and maybe you didn't do it? I mean,
right.
it's important.
Develop the pattern of consistency. And you know what? I think it's always fine for parents to start with a clean slate. I am very matter of fact with kids. If we have issues in the classroom that arise, and I notice that it's becoming a pattern in the classroom, we'll sit down and just have a heart-to-heart. I think it's perfectly fine for parents to sit down with kids and say, something's not working here. I find myself yelling, I find myself getting impatient, I see you're getting really frustrated. We need to take a step back, you and I. Let's figure this out. I think it's perfectly fine to start with a clean slate. Here's what we're gonna do from now on. It's like that deep breath. Let's just start fresh. Is it gonna happen overnight? No. Is this a magic pill? It's not. It's something that takes practice. And you have to really think about it. You have to plan ahead for what your expectations are going to be, what your consequences are going to be. I would really take some time and develop that before you try to implement it, because it does take practice, okay?
And is it any different for, we're talking about younger children, but what about for teenagers? Is it the same exact principles?
Absolutely, I think so. Why not? If you have a teenager in the house and things are not going well and you find yourself at odds all the time, have a meeting. This is not working. This is not how I want our home to be. I don't want this stress. I don't think you are enjoying this stress either. And let's come to terms. older children especially, they're going to give you some really valuable input. Listen, because they're going to be able to tell you how they want to be spoken to. Give them some leeway, give them some input. You know, these are good, intelligent, thinking people. So I would say with older children, middle school, teenagers, it's not too late. It's never too late. Start with a clean slate.
Does it have to be like a negative consequence, I guess, or can it be flipped around like in the morning, if you get your things done, eat breakfast, brush teeth, get dressed, blah, 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 then you can watch a TV show?
Absolutely,
okay.
Right. And that's part of the next step, actually, using some positive language, okay? So if you've got your if-then statements in place, I would also ask the child to restate what your expectation is. So what did mom say about being in the supermarket? How are you going to walk? How are you going to sit for dinner? How are you going to be in church? How are you going to behave at grandmom's? What were those things that we talked about? Now, of course, not all of those at once, but situational, okay? Ask the child to restate that expectation and the consequence, okay? So then they know that you know what's going on.
And again, that's something very important for parents of teens, the consequences, because I think that teens don't remember that there are going to be consequences on all of their actions. If they sneak around, they tend to want to sneak and not listen to the parents, but the parents have to be very consistent in stating the consequences
Absolutely.
and their expectations, and
Right.
that's difficult these days.
And in the teen years, there are so many outside influences. You have to be the louder voice with the teenagers. You have that whole world pressing in on their life through the internet, through music, through television, through movies. And I've been through the teenage years once, and I'm going through it a second time. You have to be the louder voice in their life. You have to be the voice of reason and the person that's going to set those consequences. It's very important. So the child understands the expectations. They understand what the consequence will be. Use reminders. This is a learning process. Are they going to get it immediately, right off the bat? No. We're all human. You know, it takes time to develop these skills. So I would absolutely use reminders. Use your best judgment. If you think 3 reminders is sufficient before you have to use that consequence, I think that's reasonable. 2 or 3 reminders or warnings before you have to implement whatever that consequence is. Positive language is something that's critical when you're working with young children and even teenagers. It's human nature that if you frame something in a positive way, the person is more apt to listen. You know, so instead of, don't run, stop yelling, I told you to, whatever. Can you flip it around to make it a positive statement? I love when you use your inside voice. Thank you so much for cooperating. Thank you for using your walking feet. Just taking a negative statement and turning it into a positive, psychologically, the person wants to listen to it. It's the way we're wired. You know, Psychology 101, for every behavior, there's consequence. Positive or negative, there's a consequence. So think about what it is that child is getting back from you. Why are they doing that behavior? Chances are they're doing the behavior to engage you, okay? I don't know if you had a chance to see the comic that I passed around before. I'll show it to you later. Highly intelligent children enjoy the back and forth banter. They like engaging adults that way. So you have to sit back and question, what am I doing to reinforce that behavior? It could be consciously or subconsciously what you're doing to reinforce that behavior. Chances are if you're using the positive language, you're going to get the results that you want for the right reasons.
I think that's probably the hardest thing as a parent. We want to discipline right away. Stop doing that. Stop doing that to your brother.
Yes.
Look at what you're doing. You're making him upset, and we go. That's where we naturally go.
Right.
Can you give some more examples of those type statements? And with teenagers, why are you home late? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you clean your room? Why? And that's just natural parenting voices that we say.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. Some other examples of, positive language. I so appreciate when you respect our home. I so appreciate when you respect the rules that we've laid out for you. I'm so proud to see you're maturing in such and such a way. Just by taking those negative statements, why are you always doing this, into a positive, gee, I really like that you're doing this. It can make all the difference in your interactions with the child or with the teen. Positive language takes practice. Yes, question,
So with a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
if they come home late, you could say something like, not that you would-
You're not talking about anyone
No,
specific.
you could say something like, I get worried or nervous when
Mhm.
you're late. I would appreciate if you call, something like that. Instead
Absolutely.
of screaming,
Right.
why were you late?
Yeah, and that's the next thing we're going to talk about are the I statements. Because you can use positive language and an I statement to get your point across without being accusatory. I
Right.
told you to come home, you're not home.
Because maybe it was for some reason, out of their control as well.
Absolutely, and getting the teenager to understand your perspective too. I don't think, I know that the teenage brain is not fully developed. And so being able to think through how the parent on the other end is feeling, waiting for that person to come home, or just giving them that perspective using an I statement can go a long way.
But they think their brains are developed.
Yes,
That's the problem.
they do, as did I.
Right. We all did. We all
all
did.
did.
You don't have to worry. I'm okay. You shouldn't worry. And
Yes.
it's really hard to get them to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, teenagers are tricky. I've come through the teenage years on the other side, and it's really refreshing to see the people that they've become. And I'm seeing it again with my youngest son, Aaron. He's right in the middle of those teenage years. Every stage of development I find to be really fascinating, teenagers especially. So the I statement can be a very powerful tool to use with children or anybody, really. If you can succinctly tell the person how you're feeling when you're disappointed, afraid, frustrated, it validates your feelings, and you're also teaching the child how to express their feelings. You're going to have a child that can then say to you, I feel frustrated when I, whatever, not included in a play date, whatever the situation may be. By you being in tune with your feelings and being able to say it in such a way, you're really teaching the child to be able to be in touch with their feelings and express it appropriately. Is it okay to be angry, frustrated, sad? Absolutely. It's what you do with it that can be a positive or a negative behavior. All of these things take practice. It doesn't happen overnight. And I would really encourage parents to think it through and develop some of these things before you implement them in your home. Think about the things that come up day to day, that you find yourself using that negative language. Stop that. I told you this. How many times do I have to tell you? Okay? So think about those scenarios that come up day to day and then flip it. So when you're in the moment, you're more apt to use the positive language. You're more apt to express yourself with an I statement. They're two really powerful techniques. Timeout. I'm not a huge proponent of timeout. I think it has its time and place. It has a very specific purpose. But if we're getting back to that inner discipline, I'm not so sure that the timeout and the inner discipline always go hand in hand, and here's why. I think in a group setting, a timeout can be very embarrassing to a child, and that's not your goal. Your goal is not to shame the child or embarrass them. Your goal is really to teach them. You want them to have that inner discipline. It is extremely rare that we ever use a timeout in a classroom setting. It's no one else's business if that child is having a rough time and they're not able to behave. So think about the time and place. If you decide to use a timeout, if it's at a restaurant or a birthday party or some group situation, I don't really encourage it so much. And I think that's different from taking a break from a situation. There's absolutely a time and a place for you to remove the child from the situation that's causing them to have a meltdown or causing them to have a hard time. That's different than a timeout. The piece of the timeout that I don't really like is that it's often a public display, and that's not really the goal. Yes.
As a babysitter, what would be the best way to ask parents before they leave what type of discipline they use?
Yeah, I would ask them just very straightforward, what do you prefer? You know, if I need to implement some rules or if I have to discipline for whatever reason, how would you like me to handle the situation? If a parent uses timeout as their, a discipline in their home, by all means, that's the method that you'll use. Timeout is supposed to be for the child to reflect on their behavior and reflect on the consequence. So if you decide to use a timeout, go back to what was I supposed to learn while I was sitting here for those, 4 or 5 minutes. You wanted me to do this, and I had a consequence. Follow through. Have that conversation of, kind of what went wrong there. And what can you do better next time? Next time when I ask you to pick up your toys, what will you do? Next time when we go to the grocery store, how are you going to behave? Those kinds of things. Follow through, because that's how you're going to get to that inner discipline. Yes.
We use timeouts a lot for disrespect, I guess. Like, she's really sassy. She'll scream at us at the top of her lungs, and we don't even raise our voices at her. We're just like, if you don't, again, back to toys, if you don't clean up your toys, then you're going to have to go to your room and go to that room. And then she screams, fine, so loud, runs to her room, slams the door, like the walls are shaking. In my head, I'm livid because as a kid growing up, I would never ever consider doing that to my mom.
Right.
So I just feel lost with all of that attitude.
Well, I would say a few things here. I would have to say, not in the moment, but kind of during a quieter time, a low-key time. I'd have a conversation with her. Your daughter's 5. So definitely old enough to understand her behavior and understand its effect, okay? So the first thing I would do is, I've noticed something, and it's not quite working for us. I need to get these things done. You get very frustrated, you start to yell and start to slam doors. This just is not working, okay? So have that conversation first. Set up some expectations for what you do want to happen, okay? The yelling, I think I would not engage. I would completely not engage in that yelling. Your blood pressure on the inside may be going through the roof. Keep a very calm, neutral. You can't hear that. Any disrespectful tone, any yelling, I would absolutely block it out. I would not engage in that at all. Pull the plug on it. Because think about the behavior and the consequence. If she's not getting the feedback that she wants from the yelling and the door slamming, why do it? Okay. Behaviors do tend to escalate before they get better. So don't give up. You know, if you're trying to correct a certain behavior, if you notice that it gets a little bit worse, expect that it will get better, because it does take practice. It takes consistency. You've got to stick with it.
And what would you recommend for this mom? Once she goes into the door, she goes into a room, she slams the door. What should mom do? Do you chase after her? Do you just let her go? Do you go back in and do you try and make your point? Like, what should the parent do with the child who does? Because this is 5-year-olds and it's 15-year-olds.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why you've got to set the tone now.
Fear when we get to 15.
Right. No, it's much easier to correct this at 5, 6, 7 than 15, 16, 17. Absolutely. So long as there's no danger involved, like if you think that she's perfectly safe, you know, she may have slammed the door, she's in her room, but you feel confident that she can't hurt herself or be in danger, I'd let her go. I'd let her cool off. You know, blow off some steam and then talk about it. How can we make this better? How can we do things differently? Children need a strategy. And often if you give them that strategy and if you practice it, it's going to become part of who they are. It'll become part of the fabric of who they are. So long as she's not in any, you know, danger, I would say let her cool off. Okay? But the yelling, the door slamming, it's not going to work anymore. You need to come up with a better way. And a 5-year-old is absolutely old enough to give you some input. So you get really frustrated. How can we handle that better? And give her some strategies. Count to 10. Do a little, you know, yoga breath. You know, teach her the volcano breathing, where you just let off that big breath and just calm. Because you want to get to that inner discipline. You want her to get to that point where she doesn't feel the need to yell and slam doors and be disrespectful. But it's going to take time. It's going to take practice.
I think what I struggle with is you should know better. So we were just on vacation with our kids, and my son pokes his sister 50 times, and she's yelling at him and he's yelling at her, and it's kind of like, I can see my husband getting to that. You should know better. And how do you deal with that? Like, where, you know, what they're 12 and 11, they should know better, but even since they were 5, you know.
Right. Yeah, I think it's time to start with a clean slate. Sit down and have that conversation. They're absolutely old enough. What can we do better? How can we make this better? You tell me. What would you know?
Yeah. And
what do you want to see happen?
You wouldn't do that to your friends. Why do you do that to your siblings?
It's a very valid point. Yeah. Absolutely.
And they'll say, well, she does it to me, or he does it to me.
And then all of a sudden,
so you've got, right. So you have to, it's kind of like you have to sit down with all of them at one time.
Absolutely.
Say it doesn't work.
Family meeting. Yeah. Right. This is not working. It's not enjoyable. I feel frustrated, angry, whatever your word is, when I am ignored, you know, whatever the behavior is. And use those I statements and have them use the I statement too. Well, I feel, and see if, you know, they can come to some kind of mutual agreement, especially children of that age.
I think by that time, they know.
11 or 12, they should know.
They know, but they just, you can tell, after consistently doing this for so many years, you know they know.
Yeah.
They just don't have the developed brain to do it.
Right.
How do you said, Renee, to establish expectations. So is it okay for a parent to say, this is not acceptable? So 11, 10, whatever age, 5 years old, this is not acceptable behavior. We are not going to have this in our house. When you say to lay down a strategy, you're talking about those kind of words with parents using?
Definitely. You're starting off with a clean slate. This has not been working, and we need a better way. We're on vacation, and you're bickering back and forth and poking each other. This is not fun for anybody. Are you enjoying yourself? I'm certainly not. Have that conversation. They're old enough to, you know, really think that through and help brainstorm strategies together.
And how about looking at the why of their behavior?
Mm-hmm.
How about
Sure.
that?
Right, and children of that age, I think they can give you some very valid input as to why that behavior keeps continuing. Behavior modification, it can be a fantastic tool when done right. With behavior modification, it's more than just a sticker chart, or more than just giving praise. If there are some specific behaviors that you're trying to curb, like yelling or, annoying siblings, I would prioritize, what behaviors do you really want to hone in on? What behaviors do you really want to correct? With younger children, you can use a chart, write down the behaviors that you're looking for, and have a system in place where when the children fulfill that expectation, there can be some kind of reward or positive reinforcement. And it doesn't have to be an object. It doesn't have to be a toy or a sticker or that kind of thing. It can be extra time with you. It can be an extra 15 minutes before bed. I would avoid having those like monetary items, toys, that kind of thing. You may start off shopping at Dollar Tree, but end up shopping at Neiman Marcus, because you're gonna have to always up the ante. So I would avoid those kinds of positive reinforcers. I would use more practical positive reinforcement. Another good technique for behavior modification is the marbles in a jar. This is fantastic, especially if you have more than 1 or 2 children in the home, because it develops teamwork. It develops a sense of we're in this together, we're working together, and we have a goal. And it's easy to implement. You need a glass jar and either some pennies or marbles, and you're going to add a penny or add a marble when you see positive behavior. I would take yourself kind of out of the equation. You don't have to verbally praise the children for the behavior, just the simple act of hearing that marble in the jar or penny in the jar. It's a good reinforcer, again, for that inner discipline. It doesn't have to be an outside influence of you saying, you're doing a great job, thank you for doing that. It's a external positive reinforcement. It's just a different technique, a different way to kind of focus on certain behaviors that you're trying to correct in the home.
Renee, do you have to be careful with that if you have more than one child, where somebody's jar is getting higher than the other jar, or is it a good thing that happens?
Well, I would use one jar. One jar for the family.
For all the family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I missed that. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
So, if the behavior in the home that you're trying to correct is the playroom's a mess, day in, day out. Things are left out. No one's cleaning up. Nobody wants to help. You could use behavior modification for a situation like that. Set your expectations. You've done all these steps prior, okay? You can't be implemented until you've done all of these other steps, okay? When you do see that the behavior is getting better, a penny in a jar or a marble in a jar, it's a visual that we're doing better. Look, this is fantastic. You've got 5 marbles in one day, or whatever the case may be. Okay. It's a good technique.
Is there a reward at the end of that? Could you have like a family reward? Go out for ice cream or something like that, or a vacation or something if you have a big enough jar to, is that something you recommend? Reward system in that way for the family so everybody works together?
You certainly could, because the purpose of that is teamwork. Everyone's working together. It could be time spent together as a family, time spent doing something fun, pizza on a Friday night, something like that. With small children, you'll want to keep it very specific. You're not going to fill a big jar. 5 marbles in a jar would be sufficient in order to, earn that reward. Older children, your expectations can be greater.
Do you think that works in a classroom setting?
It does work in a classroom setting, for sure. I've used the technique many times.
And have you used it taking out marbles for behavior that, is that shaming?
That is a fantastic question. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I never take away, because again, what's your goal? What are you really trying to teach the child? You don't want to send the message that you worked hard, but that doesn't matter. I can still take it away. That's going to be counterproductive. Once you've earned it, you've earned it. You did a great job. I don't believe in taking away.
Oh, wait, let me figure out how to word this. So, sort of similar to that, like tonight, back to the cleaning up of the toys. My husband and I said that they could each have a cookie if they got their toys cleaned up in time.
Sure.
And the one did not, and she ran to her room and slammed the door. And as I'm walking out the door, I said, remember, she lost that chance. Like, she had the chance, she lost it, she doesn't get a cookie.
Right, so you've
Our
done all
son
this.
did it, he cleaned it, he'll get it. And he's like, well, I'm going to see if she redeems herself. And I'm like, but no, because she lost it already. So there's no redeeming it. I don't know who's right in that situation.
Yeah, and that's tough.
I'm harder.
I think you're going to have to go back a few steps and really work out that expectation, because if your husband and yourself have 2 different ideas of what should be done and the time frame, then everything else is going to fall apart. So I think you have to go back a few steps and agree what consists of a job well done. Does it have to be done by a certain time? That kind of thing. I think take a few steps back.
I mean, our 4-year-old cleaned up the whole mess by herself, so there was nothing else for her to clean up at that time. So that's
There's
there's no redeeming. I mean, yes, they could make another mess and she could clean up that mess, but I don't know.
Now, I would trust your instincts on that. Sufficient time was given. The expectations were clearly laid out. If you really feel that you've done all of these steps and there wasn't any follow through, it's a logical consequence. Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So, for me, it seems like your outline here, it would be good to sit with your spouse or partner and actually have conversation and fill this out like you have tonight.
I would. Especially if there are very specific things that you want to work on, the bickering or the yelling or the door slamming or, whatever it happens to be. In the moment, it's very hard to think of these steps. But if you just take that time and develop the expectations and develop the consequences and develop your standards of behavior for your home, it's going to start to come more naturally to you as the parents and the caregivers. But even more importantly, it's going to become easier and an intrinsic quality for the child. That's your ultimate goal, remember, is to have that inner discipline. They're not behaving because you're standing over them and imposing your will. They're not behaving just because there's some behavior modification in place. They're really behaving because they've developed that maturity and they've developed that inner discipline. These are just tools to get to this end goal, but it takes practice and it takes planning. It takes planning.
So Renee, you're saying to get the child to have inner discipline that will stay with them through their school age years, into their teen years, and into adulthood, is explaining to them what expectations are, that there are consequences, and then the follow through. How about listening to their needs as a child or as a teenager? I have a a granddaughter, 9-year-old, very, very bright granddaughter. And she'll say, but I'm a person too. But I'm a person too.
Yeah. Sometimes just validating the feeling for the child will go a long way. If you can validate how they're feeling in this situation, I can see that you are a smart thinking girl. You're absolutely right. Just validating that emotion, validate their feeling, can go a long way. Or I can see that you are really upset or you are really frustrated. What can we do about it? Get their input for sure. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have sort of a specific question. Do you have any suggestions for just blatant not listening, like repeating their name 5, 6, 10 times and nothing?
You've never had that as a teacher, have you, Renee?
Never. That never happens.
I mean, it could be for anything, like if I'm trying to get you to come here, or if I'm trying to get you to put your baby brother down, or stop hitting your other brother, anything like that.
Yeah, you may have to go back and look at the cause and effect of the behavior. She's getting something out of it, or she wouldn't keep doing it. So I would have to go back and re-examine the why of that.
Okay.
And then set the expectation. When I call your name, I expect you to listen to me. I expect you to turn around. Yes, Mom? Those are the expectations. You can be very honest and straightforward with kids. How would you feel if you were saying, Mom, 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 and you weren't being heard? Use your I statement.
Okay.
I feel hurt when I'm ignored. You know, put some feelings into that. Your behavior has a consequence, and this is the consequence. Children will start to learn that too. They'll start to learn the I statements. And it's a very good quality to be able to tune in to how you're feeling and put a word to it and to express yourself. It's a very healthy habit to be able to get into. Will take them through adulthood.
So do you punish that at all, or do you just try to get through to them?
At this point, I would say take a step back. Start to reassess how things are being handled in the home. And really start with a clean slate.
Okay.
I would really just take a step back and think about the behaviors that are really important to you and important to a peaceful home. Everyone's standards are different. Everyone's parenting styles are different. There's no right or wrong there, but whatever your expectations are. And, you know, maybe take the top 3 and really just try to work on those for the time being. As far as the punishment at this point, I would say just reassess.
Okay.
Reassess and start to try to implement these steps before you have to get to the consequence or punishment.
Well, sometimes about her question, sometimes if my daughter ignores me, I call her several times, but she ignores me. What I will do is next time when she calls me, I just ignore her. So I did the same thing, and I told her that's what you will feel if you ignore people.
Yeah.
But I feel I'm so childish to do that. So I don't know if it's good enough.
Well, you know, depending on the age of the child, having them be able to see firsthand how it feels, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Do a little self-reflection there. How did it feel to be ignored? You know, I think that's a valid point. I had a class of pre-Kers many years ago. Whining was just rampant in the classroom. And so my assistant teacher and I were talking to each other with a whining voice for a couple of minutes. And the kids looked at us like, what are you doing? Mrs. G, what are you doing? worked. It just, they had to be on the other side of the fence to kind of see and hear the behavior.
Renee, I see you have in the I statement, that's different than I've learned it before. I almost want to call that a double I statement because I've learned it as I feel sad when you, but you're actually changing. That's a lot of work to remember how to say it that way.
It is, right, because you want the child to understand how their behavior is affecting you without shaming them. So instead of saying, I feel frustrated when you don't listen, for a child to hear that as opposed to a more positive way, I feel frustrated when I am ignored. It puts a different spin on it, and it gets them to start thinking about how their behavior affects you. That's something that's learned. Children aren't born knowing that their behavior has consequences. That's a learned skill. They start to develop that skill at 3, 4, 5, 6.
So you can say something like, I feel frustrated when I hear you do this, or when I see you do that. No, that's still not right, is it?
I would really try to stick to the way you feel when the behavior is done to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work to process all that in the heat of the moment, right?
It absolutely is. And that's why it takes planning and it takes practice, because it doesn't come naturally all the time, especially in the heat of the moment.
That's why we have to sit down with our spouse and have this chart.
Have a plan.
Chart. I know.
Yeah. Especially the positive language, the I statements, the if-then statements. You really do have to practice it, because when you're, at the grocery store and having a full-blown meltdown, it's tough to come up with that positive language in that moment.
Is that second word always a feel then? Is it I feel frustrated when I feel ignored? Is it another feel or not always?
Not always. No, not always.
Just trying to help with the words there.
Yeah, I would definitely start with I feel, name it, and then the verb, whatever the behavior was that affected you, without placing blame, especially young kids. You're not trying to place blame on them, you're trying to teach them. You're trying to get them to become aware of what they're doing, why are they doing it, and its effect on others.
So it's the behavior of what they did. So if they didn't clean their room, then you were ignored. Your request was ignored that they didn't do it.
Exactly.
So ignored is one thing that probably we would be able to say a lot.
Absolutely. Or even if you're seeing behavior between siblings, I feel sad when I see whatever the behavior is, being mean to one another or being hurtful, using language that's hurtful. You can.
When I hear hurtful language. When I not hear you saying first, so then you have to be sure not to accuse them, but let them know how they're affecting you. That's a lot of work, huh?
It is.
It's a lot of work, but it's important. You can see how important it is.
Right, and it goes back to that.
I feel sad. What were you saying? I feel sad when.
I feel sad when I see hurtful behavior or violent behavior.
Hurtful.
Teasing, whatever they're doing, right?
They're the same size.
When I see you two not loving one another, could you say something like that? Yeah, that's nice. See, it's tough.
It is tough.
It's tough.
It does take practice.
So what could we say in that situation when they're picking on one another?
When I hear hurtful words, when
I feel sad.
I feel sad when I hear hurtful words. That's a good way to use
hurtful actions.
Or see hurtful actions. Yeah, get the verb in there. Get the feeling and get the verb without being accusatory. That's the key. Works for husbands too, yes.
It does, it really does.
Well,
Yeah, good point.
Well, this class was called Effective Communication with Kids and Parents, but it's also can be applied to spouses, co-workers, partners,
Absolutely.
anybody, friends.
Yeah,
You know.
making yourself heard, setting expectations, being able to express yourself and be heard. I mean, these are life skills. They're not skills just for children or just for teens. It really is life skills. And isn't it fantastic if we can teach those skills at 4, 5, 6, 7, or 13, 14, 15, and not have to learn those skills as an adult.
So what would you, like as a babysitter, what would you like say or do if you ask a parent what type of discipline they use, and if they get like offended? Because I know one family, it's not really like time out or like you get sent to your room, they just yell. So I wouldn't,
Yeah.
because I don't want to yell, but
Right.
wasn't sure what kind of
I think it's
discipline you'd use.
fair if you were able to say, I'm not comfortable yelling, but I can, what are you comfortable with? You know, I'm not comfortable yelling, but I would be okay redirecting, or do they lose a privilege? You know, especially with older children, I think it's a very logical consequence if they lose a privilege based on their behavior.
It's difficult going into
It really is, yeah. When you're not the primary caregiver, but you have to,
for safety too.
Yeah.
Right.
I have another question. What if, like, is it too late to ask parents, like, if I didn't, like, because I've been babysitting them for a while, like, is it too late to ask them what type of discipline they use, since I've
It's
already
never too
been?
late. No, I don't think it's ever too late. Say, I want to do the best job I can do as a babysitter, and so I just wanted to pick your brain for a minute before you leave for the night. What can I do? How can I handle this? What do you typically do? What do you know works, for your children? I think that's perfectly valid.
And what I would say as a parent, if I come home with a babysitter, I ask them and they say, oh, everything's fine, and then the next day my kids say, well, we were fighting and the babysitter didn't do anything about it, or that makes me feel worse than if the babysitter asked me what to do.
Yeah, I think it's very valid, and I'll tell you what, I rehired that babysitter that took the time to ask that question. What works in your home? What are your standards? What do you expect?
And what about though if you have parents who there maybe not be good at discipline or doing it effectively, and you have a babysitter who tonight you're learning these things, so you apply some of these things, the kids will be like, wow, somebody's listening to me, somebody's not yelling at me, somebody got down to my eye level and looked at me and was calm and wasn't screaming at me. It could be very effective for the kids too. So I wouldn't say not to use these things if they say, oh, just throw them in their room. You might want to try something that's more effective because you learned it.
Yeah, you can certainly still use these techniques.
Good. I don't see any questions from the audience. We do have some people live here, but anyone else have any questions for Renee? Sounds like we could do a whole other class on I statements and how to handle this situation. But you know what, going forward, if you think of something and you go on, I will be sharing this on our Pillars of Light Facebook page. Renee, if somebody asks a question later, it's on my personal page right now, but I'll share it over, and then you'll be tagged in the post, so you'll be able to pop some questions in there.
Sure.
If you're not on
If
there.
things come up and you need fine tuning or you want another explanation, by all means, jump in.
I have a question about the I statement in like a group setting. So I think it's a little different when you're one-on-one versus, like, for example, I taught Sunday school. We had a couple kids who could come in and in an hour they could derail the whole classroom.
Right.
So how do you use the I field to not, you want to make sure that they know that they're the culprits, but you don't want to, like you said, embarrass them.
So I think in that situation, it might not work as well sitting as a group. I would have individual conversations.
Okay.
So that they clearly understand where you're coming from and how it affects you, and what can we do better? How can we make it better the next time around?
I have heard friends saying that one of the parents they have to be a little strict, and the other parent can be a little lenient or like friendly. So will that works with the kids for making them disciplined?
Yeah, I think both parents really should be on the same page.
Yes, you said it.
Yeah, I think, especially if there are behaviors that you're trying to correct, I think consistency is key. The expectations are consistent, but so are the consequences. Yeah, I think both caregivers really need to be on the same page. Well, I hope some of these techniques will work for you in your home, with your children, with your babysitting, with your classes. And if anything should come up, like Kathy said, I'm happy to answer more questions via Facebook or, yeah, however.
Okay. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.